last and most definitely not least, we are delighted to be joined by an inspiring individual whose story grabbed some of its own headlines and certainly lit up the M&A scene this year. Sinead Boucher was appointed Stuff CEO in August 2017, following a career of more than 2 decades in media in New Zealand and abroad. Prior to becoming CEO, Sinead was New Zealand Group Executive Editor for 4 years, responsible for New Zealand's largest newsroom. With Sinead in the driving seat, Stuff's stable of newspapers, magazines and #1 news site stuff.co.nz grew to record audience numbers and was named New Zealand's most influential publishing brand. But it was the story of the purchase of Stuff for $1 in May this year that really grabbed the limelight. And we're hoping for a few insights on getting to yes on that deal. Not short of accolades, in 2015, Sinead won Fairfax's Internal Woman of Influence Award, recognising the special role she has had in advancing gender diversity at Fairfax and beyond. Sinead was also awarded the 2012 Wilson Fellowship Prize, the highest personal accolade in New Zealand journalism. And before we come to Sinead, the team at Cigna have kindly supported this keynote session. Thank you. And here is Simon Tohill, Head of Strategy and Marketing, to say a few words.
Thanks, Vanya. It's great to be here on behalf of Cigna, and we're really proud to be a platinum sponsor of the FSC conference. We're really excited to support the first keynote speaker session of the conference. In a year where there's been huge disruption and change, we've seen that the importance of quality information alongside local expertise and brands you can trust has never been more important. As an insurer who's operated in New Zealand for over 100 years, we know how important it is to be a trusted source of information and advice for our customers. And that's why I'm really looking forward to hearing about Sinead's journey and what she sees as the future for Stuff and for the New Zealand media landscape. So wherever you're dialing in from or tuning in from around the country, please enjoy this session and the next few days of the conference. And thanks again for the opportunity to introduce this session.
Thank you, Simon, and welcome to Sinead.
Thank you, Vanya. Morena, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here. Though I'm sure, like all of you, it's a shame we can't all meet in person, and it looks like you've had a really interesting session this morning already. I'm sort of imagining, you're sitting at home, some of you in your offices, some of you probably still got your Ugg boots on, etc. I've spent quite a lot of this year in my Ugg boots through some of the most tumultuous times of not only my career but personal life as well. And I do think quite fondly back to some of those weeks of our lockdown in the beginning. So today I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my story and how some of the things that have happened in my life personally have kind of led me to sort of some of the big things that have happened to me this year. Several hundred of you out there, I'm sure a lot of you are our digital readers, and some of you may be our newspaper subscribers. And I hope you are. There's still time to join. But I wanted to say to you a tremendous thank you, because your support of our business and that of others, the New Zealand Herald and our other, news companies in New Zealand, directly funds the journalism that is so important in a healthy democracy, in a healthy society, from a community level right through to a national level. And I want you to feel proud that you are participating to keeping our own democracies and societies healthy by your support of the fourth estate in this country. So a little bit about me. You heard I'm the Chief Executive of Stuff and now the owner of Stuff Limited. We have the biggest domestic website in New Zealand. Stuff.co.nz is the biggest New Zealand website, not just the biggest news media site. We own Neighbourly, which is a hyper-local social network in itself that has 900,000 members. Stuff every day has about 1.5 million visitors. And we have 49 newspapers around the country, the Dominion Post, the Press, lots of regional newspapers. We have New Zealand House and Garden magazine, TV Guide, and a range of other things. And I feel extremely fortunate to be in my role and to have the opportunity to be the guardian of almost 160 years of New Zealand journalism. Our first papers celebrated their 159th birthday this year and are heading towards 160, the Press in Christchurch and the Marlborough Express. And you think about the history of our country that has happened over those many decades. And, for me, when I came into this role as the chief executive, it was a time of extreme disruption for the media industry. Our whole business models were shattered and broken by the rise of the likes of Google and Facebook and the shift of the advertising that supported us largely into the digital formats. And I felt very strongly that I wanted to be the guardian and that my role was to sustain and grow and protect the future of all those publications, but more importantly than the format itself, the journalism that they produce. And that's what gets me out of bed and drives me every day. And then just over 4 months ago now, I took ownership. I bought the company for $1, as you've heard from our Australian parent, Channel 9. And I surprised a lot of people with that move. Some people who thought they might be buying the company, but probably the person I ended up surprising the most was myself. Because in my whole career, I started out as a young reporter with this company actually in Christchurch. I've always thought about myself as being a loyal, hardworking employee, lucky to have a job I really loved, not as an owner or an entrepreneur. And the idea of that, I've always had a huge admiration for people who start or run their own businesses because of the risk that entails and the fact that you are responsible for so much, your own livelihood and that of others, rather than just having a sort of big, safe corporate environment. Before I went into it, I couldn't actually imagine anything more stressful or unappealing. But it's funny the places that life takes you, and I think all of us will have found this year that we've ended up in unexpected places and unexpected journeys. So we have a saying at work we use internally to inspire people to do bold work. Kia tupeke te toa, which means let the brave leap. It's our guiding kind of principle, and particularly for our journalists, but also for the rest of the organisation. But for me this year, it has really been my personal guide and something I've held close and think about a lot in more ways than one. So I just want to, bear with me a little bit, I just want to show you something. So here is a picture of me and my friends and family at Worcester Bay Beach in Wellington, where I live. I'm a Wellingtonian, on June 26th this year. That's pretty much exactly midwinter. As you can see, it was a typical Wellington day there. June 26th is my 50th birthday. And I'm not really a party person. I'm a kind of homebody at heart. But I had in some kind of, I can't even think what led me to think I wanted to do this at the time, but this sort of mad fit, I decided that the best way to celebrate my half-century was with a life-affirming midwinter dip at dawn in the Wellington Harbour with some of my nearest and dearest. I do love the sea, but not usually at that time of year, and often in places other than Wellington. And my poor friends and family, you can't refuse somebody on their 50th birthday when they ask you to do something, and so they've all turned up in their coats and jackets for us. So we turned up at dawn. It was a typical Wellington day, not one of those, you can't beat Wellington on a great day days. There'd been a big overnight storm. You can see all the chunks of weed and stuff washed up on the beach, and the bay was very grey and choppy. So we had a quick glass of champagne. This is I think it was about 7:30 in the morning. I was glam, I think, in my leopard skin and red lippy for that time of the morning. There's a whole lot of dog walkers who thought we were completely, crazy. But then we all stripped off down to our togs and in we ran. And we ran it, and the tide was out, so it took a long time to get above, our ankles and then our knees. And then we kind of all just stopped because it was absolutely freezing, 12 degrees. By the time I had waded in towards my hips, my feet were really in pain and agony from this cold. It was much worse than I had thought it was going to be. But I had dragged everyone down. I wanted to turn around and run out, but I couldn't. I just had to keep going. I'd made everyone turn out. And for those of you, I'm sure most of you in one way or another, even if you're not swimmers, you've been in a pool, you've been in a sea, and there's always that one moment that I dread when I go swimming, and it is that split second when you have actively launched yourself forward to immerse yourself, and you've come off your feet and thrown your balance forward, and it's too late to change your mind. But there's a moment there just before you hit the cold water when you know it's going to be an awful shock to the system, but you're committed, you've propelled yourself forward. And then, you're in the water and it is bloody cold and a shock to the system, but, you splash about a bit and then you find that you're warmed up and it's actually not too bad. And then after a while, it's fun. And there's some moments of, unadulterated joy, I think, I've experienced in the water. So there we are there. I really, one of the things I never thought I would do this year is show a picture to a conference of me and my togs, but there you go. To me, this year, this strange year of the pandemic, of the lockdowns, the uncertainty, and for me personally, the biggest career decision and personal decision I'm ever likely to make, of turning 50 and taking this icy swim, this plunge, is all entwined together into this one part of this one kind of indelible experience for me. But the defining thing I will think about is this is the year I took the leap. When I actively decided to propel myself into the unknown, to embrace uncertainty and risk in a way that sometimes still surprises me when I think back upon it and those kind of couple of weeks of this real intense experience. That decision to buy the company and all of the risk at the time, the uncertainty that it brought with it was quite like that 50th birthday plunge when there was definitely moments where I was a bit frightened. I remember quite a few of those and I was highly uncomfortable. But at some point I just had to take the decision to actively step forward and propel myself forward and launch myself off my feet. And that was, 4 months ago now, when I took over the ownership took effect. And yes, it was a shock. And, it was uncomfortable at first. But now I feel like we've had that experience. We've splashed around in the water a bit. And it's warmed up. And it is actually fun. And yes, there have also been a lot of moments of pure joy just being in the position that I find myself in now. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself, about me personally. So I was born in Belfast in Northern Ireland. My parents moved, it was the time of the real troubles in Northern Ireland in the 1970s. My parents picked up the young family and moved to New Zealand. My mum was 8 months pregnant. They knew nobody, they had no money, they just wanted to go somewhere where they could build a better life. Very working class family, we never had any sort of money to spare, but it was a very happy childhood. We ended up with I've got 4 siblings, a big happy kind of Irish family. And, like has happened in a lot of families of my generation, I was the first one in my family to go to university, went to Canterbury University, but after a couple of years I dropped out. And I took what I thought would be a year off, a gap year, to go back to Ireland and work and stay with my family there with the intention of coming back and resuming my degree. But what happened is I came back at an awkward time of the year and ended up going, there was a 6-month journalism class starting in Timaru, Aoraki Polytechnic. And I thought, I'll go and do that for 6 months before I kind of, end up back at university. But from the moment I started there, I loved journalism. I loved everything about that job, about the news industry, about the feeling that you were trying to contribute something positive, but also it's a job with a lot of drama and action, and you never know what's going to happen on any given day. To me, the fact that I had come from a family where, where most of my parents and family members would be factory workers, and where their kind of goal for a really safe and stable career would be for me to perhaps become a bank teller or work in the Ballantyne's department store in town, in Christchurch. This sort of feeling I ended up as a journalist for the Christchurch Press local newspaper, it just seemed like a dream for me and for all of us. And I thought then that was it. That would be, I'd reached the pinnacle of happiness in my career as a reporter, and I would never kind of go on from anywhere from there. I felt so lucky to have it, and I never thought about what might come next. But, one day, my boss at the time he'd asked me to come into the office and help him sort out the news plan for the whole organisation for the day, for the whole newsroom. And I was quite shocked about that. And I said, oh, why do you want me to come in and help you? I don't know anything about this. And he's like, yeah, because you'll be in my job one day. And to him, it was a throwaway comment, just one of those things you say. But to me, I still remember it, because I was only about 23. It still felt like a little bit like a physical slap, that there was something else that I could aspire to in that industry, and that people saw that I probably had, some of the things that you would need to succeed in there. So soon after that, I thought about that a lot in those weeks and months after that, that there may be this opportunity at some point. But I knew I was going to have to push myself out of my comfort zone. And I was someone who really liked their comfort zone. I didn't really get why people ever wanted to push themselves out of it when you're in a place of contentment and happiness. But I went to London with my now husband, also a journalist, spent a few months temping in a finance company, and was trying to think about how was I going to find my way into journalism as part of my OE. So my friend, who was a journalist living in London, got a job at the Financial Times, which is an incredible world-class paper. And he said to me the night before he was due to start there, I think I'm going to stay where I am. He was at the Times, I think. So why don't you just turn up in my place and see if they'll hire you instead? And I was like, oh, how ridiculous. I can't think of anything more mortifying than to sort of turn up at this august publication and be, walked out. And he was like, oh, do it or don't do it, up to you. I kind of wanted someone to give me the push to do it, but in the end, I knew I would have to make the decision. And it was probably the first time I really thought, this is the moment where I have to take a risk and push myself into a place of extreme discomfort for me personally. So I did turn up in his place at that morning in the office, and when the editor was told, and he came out and he looked at me and he just stood there for a minute, and then he just laughed and he shook his head and he said, oh, you Kiwis, oh, okay, come on in, I'll give you a shot. It worked out. That to me was a defining moment on two fronts, not just because it showed me that pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and taking a risk pays off, but it also set me on a path that I think has definitely led me directly to where I am now. A job at the Financial Times really broadened my horizons, exposed me to so much. It led to a job with Reuters as a European correspondent covering all sorts of incredible world news. And then eventually it led me back to New Zealand and in the role of being the first editor of Stuff, which was then just a little kind of startup side. And over the years, there have been quite a few of those sorts of moments when a chance comes along and you're not sure if by taking that plunge you're going to drown or float. I definitely had a big one when I put my hand up to be the chief executive of Stuff in 2017. So far out of my comfort zone. As a journalist, journalists are not, normally educated in business. They don't have a sound grip of finances. They have BAs, they are liberal arts, they are creative. And I didn't even have a finished degree under my belt. But I was encouraged to put it up by my sort of the person put myself up by the person vacating the job. And while I was quite anxious about what would happen if I did and I potentially broke the company, in the end, I decided to put myself forward. And again, it worked out. And I think I have just, reflected this year that there is those moments when you have to make that decision for yourself, when you have to step forward and actively propel yourself into something that is extremely uncomfortable, when you don't know what the outcome is going to be and when there is a lot of risk. But I also have learned that step of taking the leap into something that you can't know for sure is that in itself is something that feels very powerful, and that every time you do it, every little one you do, the next time becomes easier. So the more risks you take and the more uncomfortable you make yourself, the easier it starts to get. And I think there is, a few other things that start to make those decisions easier too. I've learned across the years, knowing what is valuable to you, knowing what your values are and what's important to you. And I've learned to use my values and my sense of what's important as my guiding light and to not compromise on that. Because as much as it's important to know what risks to take and to put yourself forward, it's just as important to know what risks not to take. I recall, the one time where I think things could have really gone in a different direction. Before I was the chief executive, I was wooed very strongly by an international, biggest news website in the world, tabloid style website, and they really came after me for a senior job there. And I was really flattered. I don't even know how they came upon me. It was lots of money. It would put me into a global kind of stage in my industry. And I felt so grateful and almost that they would pick me or notice me that I almost felt obliged to take it. But I angsted about it for weeks, and it would have meant a move overseas. I tried to get my husband to make the decision for me, and he wouldn't. He just said, I'll support whatever you want to do. I tried to get the decision made for me by demanding even more amounts of money and all these conditions, but they just said yes. And in the end, I realized I had to make the call, and the reason I was finding it impossible to make the decision to leap in that case was because not that I was scared or daunted about stepping up, but because it was wrong for me, and that organisation was not one that I would have been proud to work for or that held the same values to me at all. And it was so much the right call when I go back on it now. Which brings me to where I am now, where this is the year where I took the biggest leap of my life to buy a business in an uncertain pandemic that employed 900 people and had 160 years of history. And all those risks I had taken over the many years, the small ones and the sort of bigger ones, those moments of deciding just to propel myself forward into a state of discomfort and fear and embracing that. And then of finding that, yes, in most cases you could swim, not sink. Well, they somehow kind of added up to make that decision to buy stuff not that hard a decision to make after all. I knew that Nine wanted out of New Zealand at any cost. They were a massive international business. They had no interest in owning a New Zealand business that inherited us as part of a bigger takeover. We were like the free steak knives with purchase. They just wanted to sort of pass us on. But in those, if you think back to those sort of first weeks of lockdown and how uncertain everything was in terms of how long this was going to play out, what would be the impact? I know that they were talking about just winding us up so they could tidy up and leave New Zealand. And I couldn't bear the thought of all those publications, the importance of the journalism, particularly at this time, all that history and heritage lost just because a big corporate didn't have an interest in us. I knew there was a lot of risk. All of our advertising, which supports our business, had stopped during lockdown, and we had no idea if and when it would come back. But I had, on the other hand, a strong belief in the value of the work that we produce, and a knowledge that if stuff failed in all of those publications and all those newsrooms, the consequences would be immense, not just for the business and for the employees, but for everyone in New Zealand. So I rang the boss of Nine and I offered him $1 for the company, and I said I would do the deal in 2 weeks because I didn't have to do due diligence or any of those things. And he said, yes, let's do it. And I took the plunge. And now I'm a company owner, and actually, people say to me, your stress levels, the pressure must have gone through the roof. But instead, I find that has been the most liberating and freeing thing ever, not just for myself, but for the rest of the company as well, who've operated under huge amounts of uncertainty. And through that whole time, in those weeks of negotiating this deal, even though it was only $1, there was a lot of paperwork, all I kept thinking to myself was, kia tupeke te toa, let the brave leap. And now taking that leap has given me this chance to be the guardian of the next 160 years, to provide, protect and sustain and nourish New Zealand journalism. And this year, I think more than ever, I can see the need for good journalism, for trusted, independent information. In this era of social media and the deliberate dissemination of false information and fake news, we need to make sure that we can be robust in our ability to inform and educate people on the big issues, from the current pandemic and its implications that we're navigating to the climate crisis, as well as do the everyday job of the fourth estate and holding those in power to account on behalf of everybody that lives here. In the world of the media, sunlight is the best disinfectant, knowing that there is a watchdog in the form of a local newspaper or a newsroom in any town makes institutions and people, elected officials, behave better. It helps keep corruption down, and it encourages a more transparent society. So when we reach 1.5 million people every day just on the Stuff website, that is an enormous ability to influence and shape what people think. But that is a huge responsibility, and one that we take very seriously. It could be easy to abuse that kind of influence, but we are absolutely determined that everything we do will be constructive and positive for New Zealand. It is not our job to tell people what to think or who they should vote for. Our job is to inform them, to make sure that we are challenging those who would put themselves forward for power, and to give everyone in New Zealand what they need to make a sound decision. So one of the best things we've been able to do now that we're not part of a big corporate with overseas shareholders is to change the metrics of success in our country, in our company. So, yes, we need to be financially successful. That's what helps us fund the journalism. But now we don't have to shovel all of our money offshore to our shareholders. We can make decisions for ourselves. And the first big decision we've made for ourselves is to set the leading metric of success for our company across the board as growth in public trust in Stuff and what we do. And we will be measuring that externally to make sure that we can see that building. Every decision we make now is made through the lens of, is this going to build trust in us, or could it risk it or diminish it? And everyone in our company will be measured against that. Our vision is to be the most trusted organisation in New Zealand, and our mission is to leave Aotearoa in a better place to contribute to a thriving society and the democracy through all that we do. And as with every leap that we've taken, our horizons have broadened out. We're over the shock of all the change, and now we are all enjoying ourselves. And after all these years of anxiety and uncertainty for our business about what was going to happen to us, who was going to own us, the company feels very different. Being able to make decisions for yourselves and do what you think is right is really a powerful thing. We feel optimistic and proud, and I feel proud to have the chance to lead Stuff into the next great era so that we can still take many brave leaps in future. Thank you very much. Thanks.
you, Sinead. What a truly inspiring story. And now we're very fortunate to have a Q&A session with Sinead. Thank you for your time, Sinead. We do have some questions coming in from the audience, but before we move to those, just wanted to confirm, yes, you did look very glamorous in your fabulous coat on the beach with your glass of champagne. And I suppose, like, the larger the leap, then the greater the fulfillment sort of stakes on that sort of thing. And I really love that whakataki, and it's one that I'll revisit from time to time. So I'll start with, you talked about that metric, public trust and levels of trust as a number one metric. You know, and I love the idea of that, but sort of compared to something like scale, which is obviously more quantifiable, how do you measure it?
Yeah, scale is still important to us because scale is what makes a digital business work financially and give you that influence. But in terms of measuring trust, and we're very determined that it will be measured properly, we have worked with, we've put a tender out actually to a series of external research and insights companies to develop a measure for us that we can, you know, benchmark where we are now and then measure it over every, you know, quarter, 6 months and a year. But alongside that, we have a lot of signals that come into our business about trust. You know, the feedback that we get from readers, the amount of time they spend engaging in our stories, all sorts of things. And then once we know, you know, we know how to measure it, it's what we do internally in our newsrooms particularly that has got what is it that we do that can help build on that. And there are lots of very practical things around the journalism and the site that we will do, so we're underway in that now.
Yeah, fantastic. So the qualitative as well as the quantitative. Yeah. And another question that's coming through to do with leadership style. I just have to tell you this quite interesting story. On Saturday in my spin class, having a conversation, and a woman said, yes, she works for Stuff. So I took the opportunity to grill her mercilessly for that hour. I was really multitasking. Unfortunately, because I don't have your journalism background, I didn't get any dirt. But
probably just as well.
Yeah, she really actually echoed some of the things that are coming through here in terms of leadership style. She said kind and respectful and assured and transparent. And I was thinking, would you describe that as a sort of female leadership style? And it seems to me parallels maybe with the Prime Minister. Thinking about politics?
Look, I think one thing I have really learned, and I think a lot of female leaders have learned over the years, is that we've developed away from, I guess, a culture where to become successful in business you have to be like a male boss might have been in the past, and that you can become more comfortable just being who you are and expressing yourself quite naturally and authentically as a leader. And that's what I try to do. It's actually much easier to do that anyway, isn't it? So, I'd love to hear that's how at least one of my staff members might think about me. That's how I like to work, and I think that is, I can see that reflected in the wider culture of the organisation. That's the kind of people we have working there, and they're all pretty respectful and kind to each other.
And there's a question about that Facebook and Instagram boycott. You know, has it made any difference? And do you see those, news media imposters being better regulated in the future?
Yeah. So, for those who might not know about, so after the mosque shooting last year, where we all know that was live streamed on Facebook, we as a company, would advertise on Facebook like everyone, and we withdrew our own advertising from that because we didn't feel it was right for an organisation that was, built on the code of ethics that underpins our newsrooms and everything, to effectively be funding a platform that allowed that kind of thing to happen. And not only, it wasn't a case of something slipping through, there are many examples of that. But this year, I guess, we've continued the discussion about our relationship with Facebook, and about three months ago, we made the call for the same sort of reasons about, who we were and the kind of foundations we stood on around ethics and trust, to withdraw posting anything on Facebook and Instagram at all. I think that was a time when there was a lot of you know, a lot of those conspiracy theories about 5G and coronavirus and the Black Lives Matters, a lot of the kind of push around hate speech and racist behaviour on Facebook. So we thought we will pause it and see what happens, because it was a big risk, another risk, because Facebook would drive about almost a quarter of Stuff's traffic. And it was a big call to sort of pause it and see what would happen. But as it's turned out, our traffic has just not been impacted. People have discovered our stories and come to us in different ways. People still might share things themselves, but we have had a huge amount of public support for that stance, especially it sort of comes in waves. Some of you may have seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix quite recently, and that kind of helped that. So far, it's been good, but I'm not one to say we will never ever do something again, because we have to make sure that our journalism can still reach people and still have the impact it needs to have.
Yes. And also really interested in that sort of model that Stuff has adopted, where you go to the homepage and it's a contributions request, and then compare that, say, to the model of subscription for premium. What are the pros and cons?
Like there are a lot of, in the last recent years, news media have been moving much more towards back to being from an advertising funded model to one where we're actually, with Facebook and Google taking 90% of the advertising, we need to find other sources of funding for journalism, and paywalls and are common now. But we kind of decided to, at least initially, hopefully successfully, pursue a model where we asked people to contribute rather than putting up a wall to ensure that we could still keep our journalism open for everybody. I really wish those who've put up paywalls for premium all the best, because the main thing is that journalism can be funded and survive. But so far, that model of asking people to support what we're doing has been comparable to putting up a sort of a hard paywall.
Yeah, well, talk about journalism in a time of crisis. I think that is actually about all that we have time for, and we are so hugely appreciative of your time, Sinead, and we really have enjoyed hearing your story. So thank you so much, Sinead, and mā te wā.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.